Welcome to Intervention, the podcast from the Protech project. The Protech project is an EU-funded study which is exploring the feasibility of using tech to help reduce the viewing and demand for child sexual abuse material on the internet. My name's Kat McShane and I'll be your host for today's podcast. But first, a content warning to listeners. This podcast will be discussing child sexual abuse material and listener discretion is obviously advised. To go back a bit, just to give you an overview of what we've discussed already, in episode 1, we discussed why it might be necessary to develop this kind of preventative tech and the overwhelming volume of child sexual abuse material that is currently circulating on the internet. We also spoke with a survivor to get an understanding of how images of the abuse being shared and viewed, how it impacts on child sexual abuse victims. And then we also discussed how the aim of the Protech project is to use this preventative tech alongside a support program for individuals who are at risk of accessing child sexual abuse material online. So in this episode, we're going to explore further the concept of the safety tech for the project and what this tech needs to be able to do. In this case, stopping people from being able to view sexual abuse images and videos of children on their devices. And but before I go further, if you want to find out more about the Protech project, you can visit the website on protechproject.eu or on X or Twitter at protech_EU or the Protech project on LinkedIn. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 3 guests for today's episode. We've got Dan Sexton, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the Internet Watch Foundation, Jack Pursey, who is the co-founder and Senior Product Manager at SafeToNet, and Julia Nentzl, a clinical and forensic psychologist and researcher at Charité Universite in Berlin, and she focuses on the prevention of child sexual abuse and exploitation. So they're all members of the Protech project, which is working to develop the tech and the project and implementing it. And so I'd just like to thank you all for joining me today. As discussed in episode 1, it's been recognized that there's an urgent need to stop the alarming amount of child sexual abuse material that is circulating on the internet. And we want to be able to prevent people from being accidentally stumbling on it and being exposed to the material, or being able to seek it out and view it and share it and distribute it further. It could be argued that developing or this Protech project developing this technology to stop people from being able to view this material should be the responsibility of the tech platforms and services on which much of this imagery is circulating. So Dan, I want to come to you first. As CTO of the Internet Watch Foundation, whose mission is to find and remove child sexual abuse material from the internet, could you give us an overview of what is currently happening on the internet to try and prevent this type of criminal content from being viewed?
Thank you, Kat. I think one of the first things to say is that we're talking about a technology facilitated crime against children. I think that technology facilitation is important here because the scale at which we're operating, the amount of content we're finding being shared on the internet, being viewed on the internet, and also the amount of duplication of the same imageries, the same victims being found again and again, we're showing you can't solve that by just going out looking for it, finding it, or reporting it. You need technical interventions which can work at scale to prevent or make it harder for people to view and access websites and platforms that are carrying content, images, videos, child sexual abuse, and also increasingly content level interventions to prevent the sharing, uploading and storing of images and videos of child sexual abuse. And there are already some tried and tested systems out there, whether it might be using URL blocking to stop somebody accessing a website which is known to host child sexual abuse, or fingerprinting and hashing known images and videos to identify and prevent them from being uploaded and shared. The area that really does need a lot more development, and we're optimistic about, is the ability to use AI to identify new content that we haven't seen before, new victims, and make sure that is not being accessed, is not being shared or viewed online.
So it sounds like there is a lot going on in the space, but there's obviously more that can be done. So, Jack, I'd like to come to you now as the team that's been looking at developing the tech. It has sort of the form, if I can use that term, of an app that can be used on devices that people would have on their devices that is sort of connected to the internet. But can you sort of give me an idea explain the concept behind the technology? So when you guys came to it, what is it that you wanted the technology to be able to do?
Yeah, so I mean, at SafeToNet, our mission is to protect anyone from seeing harmful content on their devices, whether that be on device, whether it be when they're online, anything like that. And so the concept around what we're doing for the Protech project is to ensure that participants cannot see known and unknown CSAM on their devices when in an online environment. So what it had to do is be able to, one, as kind of Dan's reference already, but to use a machine learning model to detect not only known CSAM, but also unknown CSAM, so that it's not just kind of picking up what's already been seen, but also what hasn't been seen. So in addition to blocking the URLs or keywords the IWF already offer in their lists, we can also protect the participant from maybe seeing something that they shouldn't have seen if they're looking for that, or whether they're not looking for that. Because again, this CSAM can be found on kind of the known websites, but also on some websites that you don't expect, or on some platforms that you don't expect. So that's generally where the concept has come from, and why SafeToNet has kind of got involved with the project.
So if I can just delve into that a little bit to sort of explain to audiences. So when we're talking about known and unknown CSAM, so when we're talking about known child, so first of all, CSAM is child sexual abuse material. And then, so when we're talking about known child sexual abuse material, this is imagery that's already been sort of identified by organizations like the Internet Watch Foundation. And then it's sort of identified, and then it's known to us. And then we're able to put it on lists that is shared with other organizations that can then take these lists and then block them because they know that that material is there already. And then you've got unknown CSAM, which is material that hasn't been identified yet. So you're looking at developing tech that can also identify unknown CSAM. So how are you guys sort of trying to do that?
Yeah, so we've developed a machine learning model, which is kind of a branch off of AI, to basically train it to look for specific things. So in particular for Protech, our machine learning model is trained on neutral data, i.e. kind of what would be kind of normal. Could be anything really, then pornographic, and then also CSAM through the help of the IWF. So that's where we've trained our machine learning model through there. Machine learning models are typically, they're trained on data to be able to detect themes or things that they can kind of start to build up patterns of. And then when we refer it to unknown CSAM in particular, we are then talking about where the model can then go away and do it by itself without any kind of human intervention, and be able to then pick it up and then block it. So with what we're trying to do with Protech is to be able to detect that on, let's say, a website, and then block it from being seen, whether that's overlaying something over the top of it or blocking the website in overall. That's where we can try and help get the machine learning model working and to protect the participant from seeing something, because a lot of it is actually helping them in real time. So whether or not they're looking for it or not, it's probably stopping the damage before it's done. And that's kind of one of the core things that we wanted to do with Protech and what we're doing at SafeToNet as well.
So if I can understand that better, so if you're stopping people from even being seen on the screen, and ideally stopping people from being exposed to it overall, which I can sort of understand that, you know, in sort of other programs that might be looking at this, if you're stopping this on a device that someone's seeing, then someone else has to then come along and sort of look at this material to confirm that it's child sexual abuse material. But this is kind of stopping someone else from having to sort of moderate that content. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And it's kind of one of the things that we wanted to protect during this project as well, in that we don't, what is if a participant detects something that we don't want them to have to kind of send it through to someone to say yes or no. And that's why kind of the machine learning model is where it's at. Again, we're kind of referring to your initial point, Kat, about kind of different platforms and what they should be doing. They possibly aren't doing enough, and they really aren't. And so if they're not, then how can they protect their users? And that's where we wanted to build something which can do that as like an extra layer. So there are some platforms that have their own moderation, but we wanted to kind of add that to it. So if it is on there and they're just browsing through, again, whether or not they're looking for it or not, we can then step in, block it, and prevent the damage being done.
So how I can sort of imagine people asking, so if there is machine learning involved here and there's not a human looking and checking, how do we know that the tech is not incorrectly identifying imagery that is sort of neutral or benign as criminal material?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't sit here and say that it's 100% accurate. It's just can't do that. And so, but what we are confident about at SafeToNet is kind of the work that we've done with the IWF, and Dan could probably go into a bit more detail about how we've trained on CSAM in particular. But we're confident on kind of the results that we've had from our training with the IWF. and kind of we have performance testing for that. But also, we've tested across a whole of different metrics for it. So we have false positives, and then also true positives. If you go into a bit more detail, but false negatives and true negatives. There's a whole different kind of metrics that we follow to be able to make sure that kind of what we are giving out to the participants of the Protech project can protect them. Yes, there might be some instances where it doesn't quite pick up something, or maybe it has a false positive eye. It picks up what would be a neutral image and detects it as harmful. It's just making sure that we kind of have it to a good enough level where we believe that we are protecting the participant. And where we aren't, and this is what we're planning on doing, is adding in kind of a way to report false positives as well for the participants. And that wouldn't be where they would be actually sending us the content, because again, at that point, we don't want to see that. We don't want anyone else to see that, particularly as it could be illegal. But what we do have is a way for them to report it. We can log it, not necessarily see the content, but know that maybe the software could be improved in certain areas. So as another safeguard there to make sure that we are always improving with the model as we go along.
So picking up on something that you said there, this is illegal content. It's criminal content that you're training your program on. So if you're yourselves, your tech team are not able to look at this content, how can you train it? And I think this is sort of what you were alluding to, sort of working with Dan here at the IWF.
Yeah, I don't know, Dan, if you want to. I can just talk from the SafeToNet side that we would never see that. But Dan, I think you can explain it a bit more on what we've done.
Yeah, thank you, Jab. And I think it's a really interesting point about with any sort of intervention like this, the objective is never to impact negatively on legitimate internet usage. And this is true of any kind of intervention. And I think if you look at other systems like your spam filter on your email, it sometimes gets it wrong. Like it sometimes incorrectly flags something as spam. And that impacts on your legitimate usage of that service. But I don't think anyone wants to turn off that filter, because the alternative is you can't use your email because it's so full of malicious and spam emails and things. And really, we want the same sort of experience for an internet user. People shouldn't be exposed, and we don't want people seeing child sexual abuse. So preventing that exposure is really important. Hopefully without impacting on legitimate use. The hope is that if we are getting false positives, they are negligible, they are lower impact. And if there's that ability to improve that and say, well, actually, this is wrong, that's great. That's good feedback for these systems to get better and prevent doing that. But I think ultimately, I don't think the upsides and the downsides of that is, I think anyone will say not seeing that content is good for them, and not to mention the impact on the children themselves and those victims of not their content not being seen by people. So I think it's always a balance, particularly with those machine learning models, to try to get it right. Remember, these classifiers, what they're doing is they're being trained to say this looks like child sexual abuse, not this looks like. But that's a really powerful indicator to then action, and that might be not showing the image on the screen. It might be flagging that to a moderator somewhere that says, you should check this out. This looks like child sexual abuse. Without those indicators, their ability to prevent access, or ability to surface those things so they can become known and they can be blocked, just won't really work at scale. So really valuable tool for anyone that's trying to have a safer internet and a better internet experience for end users. As far as the ability to train and know, does your tool do what it's supposed to do? It's a particularly difficult thing to do with child sexual abuse. It's a lot easier in other areas where if you're trying to train something too, like your spam emails, is engineers can replicate that stuff. They can test it themselves. Just the act of viewing, processing, storing child sexual abuse material is illegal. And that actually makes it really difficult if you want to create a product or a tool that's going to successfully be able to identify and detect and have that intervention when you don't know, you can't train on it, you can't use it, you can't validate whether it works or not. So it's been a really, I think, valuable relationship we've had with the engineers at SafeToNet to take their engineering expertise and their models and what they believe that they can do, train on real content, so representative of the sorts of images and videos that we see online, and then test it and see if it works in a real world environment. And I think that gives us that extra level of confidence that the tool is doing what it's supposed to be doing. It is blocking the content that it should be blocking, and being able to tweak it to get that right level where it is blocking as much as possible without impacting on legitimate usage of the internet. So we don't want people to not use this because they can't use the internet in legitimate ways. We want people to adopt these sorts of systems to have a safer, better internet experience and protect children. And that means getting that level of accuracy right.
Dan, can I ask then, can you explain a bit how the IWF creates these data sets and sort of why the Internet Watch Foundation has the ability to look for this sort of material and be able to sort of share it with law enforcement and other organizations?
Well, but we acknowledge that you can't just keep reporting and finding and removing the same content. We need that. Increasingly, we've looked at how can we take the imagery that we have assessed as illegal, those images of child sexual abuse, and use that imagery to help drive technical innovations to prevent that imagery and other imagery. So those imagery of those children, other children being circulated and shared and viewed online. All of our analysts, we have a dedicated assessment team in the IWF, and as standard, every time we find a new image of a child being sexually abused, it goes through a system where we're tagging with detailed information, the number of children in that image, age, sex, skin tone of the children. And really that's primarily for us to really understand the problem, who it's happening to, how it's happening, understand trends and what we're finding online. But it also means we have these very rich and accurate data sets, which are ideally suited for testing and training these new innovative technologies, as we have done with the Protech project.
And then if I can just sort of pick up, because it seems to me there's so much child sexual abuse material out there, and there's so many different types. I mean, how do you sort of keep on top of that?
I think that's a really important point. If any of these things, it's never done just because it works now doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. It needs to be continually evaluated. And one of the examples of that is only a few years ago, the idea of self-generated content, self-generated image of child sexual abuse was a new thing. And now it dominates the majority of content we find online is images and videos where it appears the child has filmed themselves or been filmed and there's no offender present in that room. Now, the important thing, if we were just looking at the content that we'd trained on for that point and the content's changed, the danger is those models are going to be if they're not being retrained and retested constantly to keep up with new trends and new changes, whether it's we start to find more images of a different younger children or of different skin tone or sex of children, and it's ensured the models actually are appropriately trained with the sort of content online, so we're not missing things. And the worst thing I think with any of these technologies is believing that we're sort of the safety net we think is doing what it should be doing, we're okay, and finding out that children are being missed for one reason. So I think really important for us and for other organizations to continue to be recording this detailed information and ensuring that the engineers and those that are creating these technical solutions can use that information to ensure their tools are up to date and as accurate as they can be.
And then going back to sort of, I have a question for you, Jack, again then. So we are understanding sort of a bit more about what the tech that's been developed. We're understanding sort of a bit more about how it's going to find the material and how it's been trained. So what was sort of the next step for you then, of looking at sort of ensuring that there was a user-led design for this tech?
Yeah, that's right. So obviously the ML side of it is just one part. There's also the app itself. And so at the start of the project, we wanted to make sure that kind of we had basic user experience points kind of ready for us to then get kind of the detailed information from the participants themselves to understand what they would want in a solution that we have in with Protech. So we had some kind of internal design thinking sessions just to kind of pinpoint certain areas, in particular around data privacy and kind of explicit consent journeys within the app. So we had that, but then a lot of the kind of important stuff that we what we want to kind of improve on the app as we go is getting that really detailed feedback from the participants themselves to see what actually is that they want in a solution like this, because there's no point us designing something and then saying, there you go away and use it, when we might be missing out on the crucial points. So that was a really key thing that the other kind of people in the project were able to kind of help us with kind of feedback coming through. We might present some things, they might give us some ideas on what we could do in the future, what we could do now. And so it's been imperative to us to get us to a point where we can kind of get a solution which works for as many people as possible now in the project, but also in the future if we can.
Thanks. Julia, I'd like to bring you in now because your team was responsible for gathering that sort of data to find out the viewpoints of potential end users of this technology. But before I sort of ask about how you went about gathering that feedback, I was wondering, could you tell me a bit more about your work at Charité Universite Berlin and the people that you help treat?
Yeah, at Charité, we are since nearly 15 or 20 years now treating persons who have a sexual interest in children and feel distressed by it or have a risk of using CSAM or showing inappropriate behavior towards a child or committing actual offenses. So since 20 years, we are offering like outpatient therapy anonymously to them. So health insurance and law enforcement don't know that they're treated there. And in Germany, we can also talk about illegal behavior and when no immediate danger is present. So we can talk about material usage involving children. And me personally, I've been treating patients, mainly users of CSAM, for the past 4 years also at the Don't Offend Project. And we see that they often struggle really with stopping the usage and not accessing CSAM. So nowadays it's so easy to access it. In like 1-2 minutes, you are in the darknet on the CSAM forum and can watch the materials. And in therapy, we often, on the one side, look for what it's used, because pornography and masturbation in general is often used as a coping mechanism because it's very effective in making you feel better immediately. And we look at when are they using CSAM and what might be alternatives to it, but also we often use like technical add-ons or blocking sites, stuff like that, and try to combine measures to make it just harder to make the way longer to the actual material so that you can turn back. And because we all can always access it basically, but we combine techniques but that's often then very complex and a very long blacklist, for example, of websites. And so a solution like that was a very nice idea where we thought especially our patients would benefit from.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're finding all sorts of ways to put sort of blocks or stumbling blocks in the way of people being able to access sort of this material. And it's usually in combination with sort of a therapeutic program treatment where you're sort of talking through these issues and trying to help people with their behavior. So in the case of the project, you knew that there was sort of this tech was being developed and how important it was that the end user was kept in mind, that the people who were going to be using this tech. So how did you sort of go about sort of gathering the feedback from those potential end users about how they thought the tech should or shouldn't work?
Yeah, especially that group, of course, is very conscious about privacy and always feels prosecution from law enforcement. So it's especially privacy, data security, very important for that. And even for conducting interviews to just ask about an app. I interviewed patients from our program who were sometimes right in the middle of their therapy, who were maybe already completed their therapy and are only once a month coming back for aftercare groups to stabilize their effects. But also some participants who are very new in their therapy, so different kind of therapy stages. But especially for that, I interviewed participants who already showed a little bit of trust by coming in to our program, and they were very interested in and open to give their opinion and feedback.
So what questions did you ask them? Sort of what particular areas did you want to sort of get feedback from them on?
Yeah, so the main question, especially for that group, was in the end how secure the app itself, the solution is, how data is stored, what is even monitored by this technology on the device. So data privacy and security was a very large point in those interviews, but also aspects like how would they be notified that they access CSAM and something is blocked? How would they like to have like direct messages, or especially for situations where there might be a false positive, so something's blocked, where nothing problematic was shown and maybe it is a situation where someone else sees it. What kind of message should be displayed for it? How should the logo look like, or what's the name? Not maybe CSAM blocker app would be too obvious for that. So very much we discussed data privacy, how the blocking itself is notified, what amount or how broadly even material should be monitored, which went a little bit beyond even our solution here, but also like interactive additional features that might be helpful for them and how they would even like to receive the tech. So how do they access that? So these were the questions I asked them.
Okay. That's really interesting. And can you say whether there was a positive or a negative response to the idea of the sort of tech intervention? Was there sort of some feeling that, yes, this would help them, or no, it wouldn't?
Yeah, like in general, everyone thinks something like that is a great idea. And often then came a but. But how secure is it? Most of them said that it would be a useful tool, and they would have think that it would help them in the therapeutic process to stay abstinent or achieve abstinence from using CSAM. But often there came a lot of follow-up questions from them, like how the data is stored, what kind of data is shared. Most of them, or often, they would have wished that no data is secured, saved at all, and shared with us. But it was acknowledged by most of them also that for testing whether such a technology actually works, some basic data must be collected, whether the app is even really running, for example, or not. So that was something that came out there. They were also very creative with regards to how they would like to be notified, how the notification should be worded. Some of them said maybe more a deterrence warning, like we could have been the police, would help them. Others said maybe something more supportive, like maybe reach out to help resources. There is help, you're not alone. Or like alibi notifications, for example, like your screen time for today is up. Take a break. So there were very creative feedbacks with regards to that. Also with regards to interactive functions. So we asked maybe apart from what should be blocked and how they would be notified. They said maybe statistics to see how often something was blocked or no blocking was necessary to see their progress. And yeah, most of them also I asked them also with regards to the materials. Should it also block CSAM or more? Many of them said like an optional pornography filter would be useful because, as I mentioned in the beginning, pornography use in general is a coping mechanism that makes you feel better, but actually not solves your problems. So problem solving skills might be underdeveloped, and often they said such a filter could be useful in general to monitor my pornography consumption. Others said, no, at least I want to have that as an alternative. Some also were a little bit concerned with regards to how precise, what you mentioned in the beginning with regards to false positives, that too much is blocked. So sometimes, especially with individuals who are sexually attracted to adults and more or exclusively have a preference for minors, use adult materials with adult creators who look still very young. So there was fear of what is when material is blocked that is really 100% legal, but looks like it could be CSAM. So these were some concerns.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of feedback, a lot of information to sort of go through. Jack, if I can come back to you then, I mean, it sounded like there was a lot of stuff to sort of analyze and sort of assess and sort of what might be useful for you to be able to use in the development of the app. So were you able to sort of incorporate into the design from these sort of interviews?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Julia's gone through, like there was a lot that we could do. And that's crucial for making sure that we get the very best experience and also protection that we could do. We spent a lot of time reviewing a lot of the ideas that came in, because with it, obviously everything else that Julia said as well around kind of being anonymous or being very privacy centric about their data, it was also weighing up an idea of, okay, we can do something like that, but actually does it fit in with everything else we're trying to do with the app around kind of keeping their kind of data protected and everything like that. So, and also making sure that we give the very best experience that we can do. I believe there was one idea as well around having like a diary, and that is that there are some great diaries that are kind of available on the App Store, Google Play Store. And so again, it's weighing up, yes, we could do something like that, but would it be the very best experience for them? And would it actually be good for them if, say, they had multiple devices within the project? Would we be able to offer them a solution which was good for their data privacy as well? So luckily, there was a lot that we could do. There are also some limitations that we found with the different platforms as well. So having two different kind of desktop OSs in Windows and Mac, and then also having the mobile OSs with iOS and Android. They also had to weigh up what was good for having feature parity along all of them. And again, making sure that we use our time right to kind of make sure that, yes, we've got all these great things, but can we do them as we go along in the future to make it a solution which is better as we go? Because I think that was a really crucial point, that we wanted to make sure that it does its job in protecting the participant, and then it also in the future helps them along their path to kind of help them with their trying to seek out CSAM or to view it. How can we make it a better solution going forward by adding in these new features, while also giving us time to make sure it's the very best experience?
I think we're running out of time now, but I've got one last question to sort of ask, because I think people are going to say, this all sounds great, but won't people try and circumvent the tech and sort of find ways to get around it? So perhaps this is something both you, Jack, and Julia can sort of respond to. Jack from the sort of the tech perspective, and Julia from knowing the sort of the participants and sort of the Protech project. What would be the response to that?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to build something which is completely foolproof. And I guess there's a couple of trains of thought that there are certainly different ways, especially with the limitations, as I mentioned, on the different OSs, operating systems. It's very hard to make it all like one size fits all. So some things might work really well on Android, but not necessarily work well on iOS, just due to how they're built. So that's kind of one limitation with everything. But the other side is we want to make sure that we build a solution which is right for the participant, and we don't really want to kind of restrict something that maybe isn't what they're using it for example. So they go through what we like to call a data privacy, explicit consent journey, where they know exactly what's going on their device, so they can then make a decision. So for them, it's making it kind of a something that's suitable for them, not forced upon them. I think, Julie, you could probably give a better idea into how the participants work with you.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's not a technology to surveil and control our participants, but to support them in the therapeutic process, to give them like a tool that can assist them in stopping using CSAM. And there's always a way around it. I mean, our solution here focuses mainly on the online browsing. You could also use CSAM that you already downloaded, for example. In therapy, one of the first steps is usually to delete collections, but there's always a way around it. You can use another device. Worst case scenario, you don't want to notify your therapist to go in the next tech store and buy a second phone, for example. So there are always ways around, and it's not it was never the idea to make it like impossible, because we can't control it and surveil everything, but just to make it harder for themselves, and in that way support them to stop using this.
No, thank you. I think that's been a really useful discussion on this topic, and thank you everyone for taking part. The next stage of the sort of the project is to sort of test the tech with end users, to sort of gather feedback on usability and sort of identify problems and sort of assess how feasible this sort of tech intervention would be. And that's what we'll sort of be exploring in sort of further episodes. But for today, I just need to give a mention to the Sparks in the Dark website, which brings together information on many different research projects which are working in the child sexual abuse prevention area. It sort of pools knowledge and expertise, bringing it all together on one site. So you can find out more about Protech and other projects at sparksinthedark.net on the internet. So with me today has been Dan Sexton, Chief Technology Officer at the Internet Watch Foundation, Jack Pursey, Co-founder and Senior Product Manager at SafeToNet, and Julia Nentzl from the Charité Universite Berlin. So thank you very much for all joining me today.
Thank you, Kat.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Kat, for having me.